Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting with global business leaders in Beijing today, urging them to protect global industry and supply chains amid the escalating trade war. Around 40 executives joined the meeting, including leaders from Pfizer, Qualcomm, Blackstone, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota, and FedEx. Here now to discuss, we've got Shehzad Qazi. He's China Beige Book's International Managing Director. Shehzad, great to have you in studio with us. So the pitch from Xi Jinping is that globalization, the train has left the station. Do you think that this pitch to CEOs to continue to work with China is going to work with these executives amid the escalating tit for tat with the U.S. over trade?
So these executives that were at the forum and at this meeting specifically are some of China's closest friends in America. The question I think President Xi should be asking himself is that these folks who at one point got to pretty much dictate American trade policy, how much sway and how much influence do they have in Trump's Washington today?
And what is the answer to that, given the fact that, and what does it mean for these businesses, right? Because they can't look too friendly to China because they don't want to upset the president amid a tariff war, but they also potentially want to leave themselves open to opportunities with China in case this tariff war gets to a place where they need to lean on other countries. How do they navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly in a hard spot because, they are the first ones to lose when there are tariffs, and they get also punished potentially in China when they're retaliatory measures by Beijing. That said, I think DC has changed pretty significantly, and especially the administration right now, I think, counter to what markets think, is very serious about altering America's trade relations with the world, specifically with China, which I think means that these corporate CEOs will not be getting the type of hearing and audience that they are used to, perhaps.
Yeah, I had a question for you. People say one thing and do the other a lot of times. Companies are no different. We're seeing a lot of companies announce big investments in the U.S. My question, though, is a lot of them are just increases in what they're doing. What's going on China's side, right? Are these companies still keeping that spending and just not talking about it, the levels of investment directly there?
Yeah, the China picture has become really interesting because you have actually their own Chinese suppliers that are saying, we're going to go to Vietnam, we're going to go to Cambodia, and of course, we're going to go to Mexico because that's the only way we can get away from tariffs. That, of course, creates a whole other issue on the policy front for policymakers to address, which is known as transshipment, which is that oftentimes my joke is that you put the final lace in the sneaker, at some third country and send it to the U.S. so it can avoid tariffs.
And I guess I wonder to what extent you think that that is something that the president is going to work to punish. We've already seen this. He talked about how if the EU and Canada work together, they're going to face even more tariffs. Should companies be prepared to get punished for any type of workaround that they might enact?
I would say that companies need to be prepared for a lot more trade policy uncertainty, both in terms of what tariffs are rolled out next week and then how this tariff saga continues, because I don't think this is leaving us anytime soon.
And I also want to get a sense of where you see the tit for tat on tariffs going specifically with China, because we had President Trump teasing out this idea this week that he might be a little bit more willing to negotiate with China on tariffs if they make a deal with him on TikTok. What did that tell you about where his strategy is leading? Yeah,
well, I think from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party, they still think that President Trump is ultimately a deal maker and not tariff man, as he calls himself. So they haven't hit back very hard as yet. I think the comments about TikTok, where the president has now explicitly linked tariffs with TikTok, probably make them think they could score another big deal with the president.
You said this is going to be an ongoing saga. You don't expect it to end, but do you think it's going to be an ongoing long tariffs in place for a while, 25%, or the saga more like a soap opera? Every week it's on again, off again. This person's in a relationship. This country's being tariffed, not being tariffed. Is it volatility or consistent tariffs?
I think it's a lot of volatility because right now we're going to hear about what tariffs are going on immediately. Then potentially what tariffs may come on as more investigations happen. Then you get into the deal making, what comes off, what comes on. So this is very, very complicated. Right now we're just talking about top line numbers. Most conversations don't even address the underlying trade laws that are being applied, and that is very complicated stuff. So that's why I think far more volatility than markets are prepared for so far.
But it sounds like you do not think that we're in for a lot of negotiation that's going to leave investors happy. Why is that?
I think not across every country. I think China is going to be a really hard one to work out unless you do what I call a skinny deal, which is you just do commodities purchases, you do a TikTok deal, that sort of thing.
But given that he's been so focused on Canada and Mexico, I've wondered if maybe this time around he's not going to be as hawkish on China. Tell me why I'm wrong. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're wrong right away. You certainly look very right. We've decided to pull forward the USMCA review, I suppose. So we'll see how this pans out. The fact is that there could be a scenario where Beijing ultimately says, you know what, looking around, we're actually coming out just okay because we've got the fewest tariff increases to deal with of anybody else.